Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and very good morning. Yang berbahagia, Datuk Seri Mustafa Muhammad, Advisor of the Ungku Aziz Center for Development Studies Universiti Malaya. Yang berbahagia, Datin Seri Profesor Dr. Suhaiza Hanim Datuk Muhammad Zailani, Director of Ungku Aziz Center for Development Studies Universiti Malaya. Yang berusaha, Dr. Muhammad Abdul Khalid, Fellow Research Institute Kajian Malaysia dan Antarabangsa IKMAS. Yang berusaha, Dr. Muhammad Syafiq Burhanuddin, Fellow Pusat Kajian Ekonomi dan Kemasyarakatan Institut Kefahaman Islam Malaysia. Distinguished panelists and moderator, ladies and gentlemen. To bless to the event, let us begin with the recitation of Al-Fatiha. For those of other faith, you may take this moment to pray according your own belief. Al-Fatiha. Amin, amin, ya Rabbal Alamin. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's now my pleasure to invite Yang berbahagia Datuk Seri Mustafa Muhammad, Advisor to the Ungku Aziz Center for Development Studies Universiti Malaya, to deliver his welcoming remarks.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi. Salam Malaysia Medani. Good morning. Saudara Pengacara Majlis yang bahagia, Profesor Datin Sri Dr. Suhaiza Hanim, Director Ungku Aziz Center for Development Studies Universiti Malaya, our keynote speakers, Dr. Muhammad Abdul Khalid, Dr. Ikmas, Dr. Muhammad Syafiq daripada IKIM, panelis, moderator dan panelis, Profesor Fatimah Kari, moderator. Kita ada hari ini 2 keynote speakers dan 1 panel lah. We're running a little bit behind, mungkin about 25 minutes. I won't talk too much ya. Pertama saya bagi pihak UAC, saya diminta untuk cakap sepatah dua kata mengalu-alukan semua yang hadir pada hari ini, dan kita harap hari ini kita dapat bincang isu poverty dengan mendalam. Yang kedua, terima kasih kepada semua pembentang kerja, keynote speakers dan juga kawan-kawan yang hadir, ramai orang lama sini ya. Kita ada juga dari Datuk Dr. Anis, ya, pengarah Informa. We asked him to sit in front, but he's right and back. Thank you for joining us. Ya, pengarah Informa, kita ada Profesor Emeritus Dr. Izrin Arbi, Profesor Dr. Zakaria, ya, dan a few others, kawan yang hadir ni, selain daripada Profesor Syamri Siwa dan kawan-kawan yang bersama. This is in conjunction with International Day of Poverty, World Poverty Day, which was 17th of October. That particular day, there were a few programs. I was in one of them with Professor Mak Khalid dari UGM. That was on the 17th. There's another one at KLCC. So on that day, there were 2 programs. This is the 30th of October, at the end of the month. Poverty remains a big moral issue. We all are obliged to resolve and eliminate poverty. Firstly, I want to share with you that at UAC I've been helping the center to have programs cutting across all the various socio-economic dimensions, but the focus has been on poverty. About 3 weeks ago, we had one at Wyndham. We discussed this with Professor Fatimah Kari. Thank you. Unfortunately, she couldn't make it. She had to be in Sarawak. That was a two-day affair, highly successful, officiated by Puan Nuriza Anwar. And there were 200 participants from government agencies and NGOs. First day was panel speakers. Second day was a workshop, where participants went through the actual experience of calculating MPI. That was very useful. That was MPI about 2 weeks ago. And we had one on poverty among the Chinese in Kebong. That was about 2 weeks ago. So there's been a lot of conversations around poverty. This is, of course, to further the legacy of Almarhum Ungku Aziz. And on the 6th of November, we have another one in PICC. That's in conjunction with a program organized by the Ministry of Higher Education. UMS Malaysia has been given the slot in the afternoon. The 6th, there will be a poverty in ASEAN. We have speakers from Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines, and of course Malaysia. So I'm just sharing with you a few programs we're having. But it's not just quantity, of course, the quality and outcomes. So where do you go from here? This year, I'm pleased that I've been involved in so many discussions of poverty. What's the way forward? Where do we go from here? I think that's more important. Not so much the quantity, but more importantly, the outcome. One, of course, we know that there's been some success stories in this country, but poverty is still with us. Absolute poverty, which is supposed to have been eliminated probably about 2 years ago, is still with us. Relative poverty is still there, yeah. So it still remains a big issue. On the 27th of this month, Nanjing University in China invited about 15 scholars, six universities, including University of Malaya, also someone from the Economic Ministry and also the Northern Corridor. I was there as well with Professor Suhaiza. We listened to a presentation by 2 Chinese experts on how they eliminated poverty in China. As a follow-up to that discussion, we decided that perhaps in the first quarter of next year, we will have a program in looking at poverty in China, yeah, what we can learn from the Chinese experience. Yeah. So China, as you know, has come a long way. They are now in what they call the phase of consolidation. Yeah. There's no more absolute poverty in China. They're dealing with relative poverty. What they're doing now is start trying to prevent people from going into the vulnerable group, yeah? Those who might fall into poverty once again. It's amazing success, we all know, which is well documented in many studies, yeah? Not only in China, but many scholars throughout the world. World Bank and others have studied the poverty issue in China, done an excellent job. And we are thinking that perhaps Q1 of next year we'll have a program on what we can learn from how China dealt with the issue of poverty. Anyway, welcome to this program once again. This is held in conjunction with our intention to further the legacy of Almarhum Ungku Aziz here at the University of Malaya. For that reason, we've been focusing a lot this year on poverty. We'll continue to do that. But as I said, what's important is not so much the discussion, the resolutions. Yeah? We need to measure the impact and see progress, how much progress we achieved in the last few years. Once again, on behalf of Professor Suhaiza and others at UC, let me thank you for coming here this morning. One whole morning, 2 keynote speakers. Once again, one keynote from Dr. Muhammad Abdul Khalid, IKMAS, and Mr. Shafiq daripada IKMAS. Dan there's going to be a panel chaired by Professor Fatimah Kari. Jadi dengan itu saya sekali lagi mengaturkan kehadiran semua. Terima kasih kepada kawan sentiasa menyokong program. Banyak kita buat program di perpustakaan Sabah ini, dan insyaAllah 6 hari bulan, sekali lagi 6 November, we inviting you to be at PICC. This is a program, Poverty in ASEAN. Comparison was been done in Indonesia, in Thailand, Philippines, and of course Malaysia. That will complete 2025, dan Q1 2026, insyaAllah kalau ada rezeki, ada panjang umur, kita akan ada program dengan bersama dengan rakan-rakan negara China untuk berkongsi pengalaman bagaimana mereka membasmikan kemiskinan negara China. Terima kasih kepada semua. Saya ucapkan atas padu program ini. Mudah-mudahan dengan adanya program begini, nama Almarhum Ungku Aziz akan sentiasa segar, bukan sahaja di seluruh pelosok Universiti Malaya, tapi di seluruh pelosok negara kita Malaysia, insyaAllah. Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Yang Berbahagia Datuk Seri, for your welcoming speech. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now continue with our keynote address. It is honor to invite Yang Berusaha Dr. Muhammad Shafiq Burhanuddin, Fellow at the Center for Economic and Social Studies, to deliver his keynote speech on Beyond Income, Ungku Aziz Vision of Poverty, Dignity and Development.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and very good morning. Yang berbahagia Datuk Seri Mustafa Muhammad, yang berbahagia Datin Seri Profesor Dr. Suhaiza Hanim, Pengusaha Dr. Muhammad Abdul Khalid, Datuk-datuk, para profesor yang saya hormati, thank you for this invitation. I'm humbled. I don't feel adequate at all considering there's learned, distinguished economists. A seasoned politician who is in reality an economist, even more doesn't help with my intimidation. And of course we have very senior professors like Professor Fatima, so I hope I can still value add, because indeed what I want to share is based on my several years research on the thoughts of Professor Ungku Aziz on what he understands development as a whole. But I would like to start with a caveat. My approach of how looking at Ungku Aziz, because I'm not a qualified or professional economist like Dr. Muhammad Khalid, but I'm looking at it from the standpoint of two angles. One is intellectual history of ideas, because my graduate training was in humanities. So pretty much like what Prof. Ungku was advocating at one time, philosophy, history of ideas. But I did have, I took a graduate program, a course on Islamic economic thought as well. So, but that's like more like economic philosophy. Prior to that, I studied international business, but I wouldn't say that's adequate at all to have a lot of say on economic prescriptions and policies. So I leave that to Dr. Muhammad Khalid. I'm sure he will enlighten us as usual. So hence, that's my two approach. There's two terms that I introduced there, based on what I will offer you briefly. One is meta-economics. Meta-economics is not I know it's a rarely used term, but it has been used by distinguished economists. Chiefly amongst them is E.F. Schumacher, who was a distinguished protege of John Maynard Keynes. I'm sure Dr. Muhammad Khalid may have heard. But by meta-economics, we mean in terms of the whyness of economics, why we do that. And I feel that Ungku Aziz did have a say on that. And of course, when we recognize meta-economics, there is a growing assumption that when we talk about economic thought, there's a diversity of economic philosophies. Maksudnya, different religions and cultures, civilizations have different perspectives on economics. So I more or less ascribe to this viewpoint, and I can present to you my arguments here. But please correct me, I'm still learning on this matter. Second point is the fact that when we look in terms of economic questions, I think it's important we look at it from a cross-disciplinary perspective, which I believe is what Ungku Aziz was espousing as well. So some of this reference is the basis of what I said. E.F. Schumacher's book, most famous is Small is Beautiful. He studied on the ground as well, like Ungku Aziz. He went to Burma and Europe, of course, and he looked deeply to Buddhist economics, interestedly, for someone studying under Keynes. And then I'm drawing your attention to a book by Professor Jeffrey Sachs, because I know Datuk Sri Tokpa very involved with SDG now. There's an interesting discussion, this is a new book on ethics in action for sustainable development, and I think this is much in agreement with what Ungku Aziz has to say on ethics as well. And then the book on the brown one is Livelihood and the Common Good. Was written, published by my professor of Islamic economic thought, basis of my presentation. So when I said cross-disciplinary approach, Ungku Aziz wrote in the 90s about how that a lot of the problems in the modern world we cannot solve within a particular specialization. We cannot pigeonhole the problems. When I read this, this is so ahead of its time, because now a lot of even professors in the West, only now they are talking like this, about the need for cross-disciplinary approach to solve complex problems we are facing. In terms of how we should see Ungku Aziz as an economist, I don't know whether this has been said, because I studied his biography, and when he said that his father taught him the importance of having this saving habit, right? His father, Ungku Abdul Hamid, lived in the early 20th century. And those days, does anyone know what is the term for economy in Bahasa Melayu that was used by the Malay people in general? Any guess? Term economy dalam Bahasa Melayu apa dia? Huh? What? Kan? Iktisad. This is an Arabic term with philosophical meaning as well. But iktisad, because I think that's why Ungku Abdul Hamid emphasized these things, because he didn't, although they were an aristocrat, they didn't emphasize accumulation of wealth, people like him. Keluarga diraja, this was, his father was a brother of Sultan Abu Bakar of Johor. Kenapa tak kata, increase the family's wealth? Pada kata, save. So my reading is that, because I look into history of ideas, as I said. So only during Ungku Aziz's time, the term economy is used dalam Bahasa Melayu. Before that, it wasn't used. Dato' On bin Jaafar, Dato' Sri, used the term iktisad in his speeches. I read. So meaning dia sedikit berbeza. The meaning is slightly different from modern economics today. Interestingly also, a friend of Ungku Aziz from Australia, Professor Arndt, H.W. Arndt, stated that Ungku Aziz has never been entirely happy with economics as a discipline. But I was not able to find out further why he said that or when Ungku Aziz said that. But I do know that when Ungku Aziz spoke about poverty and rural development, rural poverty, the basis of that, yes, he sees that from a standpoint of economics. So therefore he wanted to define the problems of rural development and to conceptualize possible solutions. But this was 77, and I believe Ungku Aziz continued to evolve his thinking about tackling poverty. Interestingly, in 1979, Ungku Aziz does not dismiss what Islamic economics or Islamic economic thought has to say about the question of about addressing our problems. He said, in 79, he said he felt that we still need to evolve or discover what exactly is the model of Islamic economic system, which I think a lot of our the academics globally have adequately done enough, I think, from my humble reading. And how such a model would relate with other systems and how it would work into this context. So, but he felt that, because he said, this is what Islamic scholars, financiers, and statesmen will have to devote their minds for decades to come. And in terms of economics, because when you, meta-economics, if you look into the how it's being deployed, how istilah ini digunakan, in a gist, basically, what is our ethical standpoint basis for conducting economic research or tackling economic problems? Ungku Aziz does not shy away on this question. In fact, in the 90s, this statement actually is from an article he wrote in light of Wawasan 2020. He felt that, look, this diversity of religions in Malaysia, Islam, Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, I Ching, the teachings of I Ching, Feng Shui, animism, this should be the basis for the ethical standard Malaysians should aspire to, because this is what we relate to. Right? And because if we don't have this, corruption will continue to rise, because no one is holding to any kind of ethical compass. And another point on what we can gather or what we can consider to be Ungku Aziz's meta-economics is that when he speaks of Islam, because he realized that, he said, we are trying to bring our people from a backward state economically. He stated this in 79. Kita nak cuba naikkan taraf rakyat kita into a higher standard. But if we do that without faith, like in the West, we will continue to have turmoil. This is Ungku Aziz's words. So we cannot, he's definitely not separating this question away from religion in an ethical sense, right? Not merely ritual sense. Now, what is his economic framework? I think if you look into his entire corpus of writings, Ungku Aziz, which has been published by his students, 6 volumes, right, for like 6 volumes, compiling all of his articles, which constitutes how he understands development. The cooperative economic framework stands out the most, and this is his method of tackling poverty in reality, I think. And this, in fact, in his key professorial speech, this is his basically ultimate proposition, it seems, in terms of economic framework. But what does he mean by this cooperative economic framework? Cooperation, although it has, okay, this is the reference in his professorial speech named Poverty and Rural Development. He stated cooperative is the best method to address rural poverty. So this idea of although this idea of kooperasi lah, sekarang bahasa Melayu kita kata cooperation, kan? Although we know it as an institution, actually it's an economic idea. It emerged, I think, in late 19th century, early 20th century in the West as a response to growing industrialization and the excesses, extremes of capitalism. So some people in the West actually didn't like this. They were not Marxists, but they were socialists inspired by their own ethical teachings. Some of them inspired by Christianity. So basically it's a reaction to the problems created by extreme capitalism or profit maximization, which saw that there was no social benefit. But I think there's nothing wrong. I don't know whether it's still an issue to be identified as a socialist these days, because I think at one time it was. But I think what Ungku Aziz understood it's not in the Marxist sense. I think it's in there's another school of thought of socialism or socialist school, which is called the Fabian socialist, which calls for gradual approach to reform or improving the circumstances. Gradually maksudnya not like the Marxists calling for revolution, bring down the authorities in power. And interestingly, when I was looking further into this Fabian socialist thinking, 19th century, right? At that, although you say, oh, this time the British, they were colonizing everywhere. What are you talking about? But they were not the ones who were responsible for colonization. I think they were trying to change the situation. And they were looking into the Muslim world for a model, for a source of inspiration. And some of the Fabian socialist cooperative people in the West, in the British, they looked into the Ottoman Empire because, rightly so, in the Muslim civilization in the past, like Ottoman Empire, there was already a cooperative model. The term cooperative was used in Arabic because there is a term in the Quran that refers to this, ta'awun. Okay, if you to give a mapping in terms of how Ungku Aziz extends or applies his economic thought, it starts from what I would call his framework, more like philosophical, abstract, right? Of course, it's based on field research as well. But then he translates that into institutions, right? Hence Angkasa, Tabung Haji, which actually is a form of cooperation kind of model. And then later on he proposed this, which he proposed for the government to take up, but I don't know whether it was implemented to some extent or in a certain measure. He proposed this to be established. It's called Agency for the Mitigation of Extreme Poverty. And in terms of how it would look like in a policy is, of course, the emphasis would be on elevation of poverty and rural development. So that's how he thought about economics. But then he realized in the late 60s, and I think this is maybe part of the problem. I don't know, is there anyone from Angkasa here? I hope, please correct me if what I'm saying this is not wrong, it's not right. Because he felt that, okay, like the cooperative model that emerged in the 20th century maybe can play a powerful strategic role in the West because it came from Western figures, right? Robert Owen and so on. But in Malaysia, Malaysians needs to be inspired by the ideals and philosophical experience that are in harmony with their own experience and social life. Without a well-established spiritual, philosophical, or ideological basis, a movement cannot make any positive impact on economic development. I think that's why Ungku Aziz is looking more in terms of what Islamic economic thought has to say about this. And interestingly, when Ungku Aziz, like if you were to ask me what's his overall economic vision, of course he's pretty much in agreement with the Dasar Ekonomi Baru and you know, a lot of the government policies, part last time especially. But he felt that also that in terms of the Islamic viewpoint, you can get, he says here, you can get into the just Islamic society when you practice the Islamic system of taxation and when you really practice the precepts of the Quran. See? This means you must give to the poor all the time. There should not be poor people around you while you are enjoying wealth. But what is the model and how will it come about? We don't really know. So it's a tentative one. So there is, to me, there is an honorable thing by Ungku Aziz, meaning to say there's something he still doesn't know, but he's floating it to us for us to pursue, for us to consider. Right? And he said this when he was 57 years old. Before he was retired. He retired in 88. This is a recent work which I think pursues what Ungku Aziz was talking about, right? Islamic social order and its frameworks, studies and critical reflections by several authors, if you're interested. Okay, I'm coming to an end now. Hope I didn't bore you. So if I were to propose what is Ungku Aziz's overall economic thought, of course when in my book I tried to weave together, like try to present to you what is his thinking on development as a whole. For me, I don't think development equals economic development. To me, development means more. I think Ungku Aziz says that too. Development also means the quality of people's thoughts, character, level of standard of ethics, culture, right? But Ungku Aziz, if we were to zoom in on economic thought, I'm sure there is a meta-economics, although he did not use the term, I'm proposing there is a meta-economics, because he talks about the philosophy, Islam, ethics, culture, right? So that to me sounds very much like meta-economics that is discussed in the West. But then of course the body, the main content of his economic thought pertains to cooperation. And when he talks about cooperation, not merely in the organization, but he wants that spirit of self-reliance, berdikari, so you can move yourself out from poverty. And he wants that saving habit to be imparted in society. So when he learned that from his father, he wanted that to be practiced in society as well, as a habit, not merely being borrowing society and putting ourselves in debt. And of course, we must always find ways to mitigate extreme poverty, because even for him, this is the Islamic economic system based on the Quran. So, by extension, economic development means several. I think there are certain characteristics we can see what he understood by that. In some ways, it is in agreement with SDG, but in fundamental way, no. I will tell you why after this. Number one is we need to be able to make sure that our economic model is in harmony with nature, not exploiting nature. This is a fundamental shift, because he refers to Asian philosophies, Islam, Eastern Asian philosophy. We have always lived in harmony with nature. And then, of course, the aim is a just society, not merely a rich or wealthy, high-income society. My humble reading. And then, of course, there must be an educated population, and this educated population continues to be learning, not merely consuming. Today, it seems the trend is consuming. We're consuming ideas, we're consuming content, but we're not actually learning in terms of how we can move to a better direction. And of course, he espouses a higher standard of living, and I think when he speaks of high standard of living, it's not necessarily as prescribed by capitalism or socialism. In conclusion, So I think one way to help us to understand this big picture, what I'm sharing with you is a big picture way to understand Ungku Aziz's thought. Imagine the tree. Ini falsafah sikit. Pokok kan? But this is an old wisdom that's been used by great thinkers of all civilizations. Tree. Imagine a tree. The fruits you want to see, high standard of living, minimum poverty, that is the fruits. But there is also the roots. Like any tree, there's a roots. The roots is the right ideological framework, the right philosophy, the right ethics, and not necessarily only from one religion, from all the religions that we identify with. So we should look at it as a tree of development, right, to overcome poverty. Therefore, for Ungku Aziz, development was not confined to mere economic growth, let alone to just having infrastructures. And lastly, I think his thoughts, therefore, continue to be relevant, not only in terms of a method, right? Maybe people can argue the Sarong index. I mean, maybe that's not relevant anymore. I don't know. Some economists can correct me. But if you look at the overall thought, economic thought, that one is where the relevance continues to persist. Thank you very much.
Selamat pagi. Terima kasih terima sekali kepada Dr. dan Profesor Azhar kerana menjemput. I'll speak in English, yes. The topic given to me is the future of inclusive prosperity. Maybe I'll start with answering that question first. The future of inclusive prosperity. The answer is there will be no future. And I'll explain to you why there's no future. First of all, I will look into two angles. Number one on poverty. Number one in poverty. Number two, I will look at inequality, the gap between the rich and the poor. Why is it no future? The current poverty rate in Malaysia, based on Department of Statistics, is 5.1. It has reduced from 6.2 to 5.1. The target of 13 Malaysian plan, which means the target that we're going to reach, we aspire to be by 2030, is 4.7. Basically unchanged or little change from the current rate of poverty at the moment. The target should be 0. That's number one. Number two, in terms of income inequality, the gap between the rich and the poor, the target that we have now and the target that we aim to be in 2030 is basically unchanged, a reduction of 1%. We aspire to be a country with income inequality level is the same as United States, where we should aspire to be income inequality of a country of Nordic countries, which is more equal, more inclusive. And that's why I argue there's no future, because that's our plan, that's the official plan. But I'll tell you also that how we plan or how we spend to address poverty and inequality is inadequate. In fact, we have rolled back some of the programs to eradicate poverty. For instance, we look, point number one I want to make, we still look at growth alone and not just growth with equity, which since second Malaysian plan up to 12th Malaysian plan, we always look at growth with equity. You want to grow the cake, at the same time you want to see who gets the cake. Prof. Zakaria here is an expert in this. And we tend to ignore that. 13 Malaysian plan say we want to be top 30 economy in the world. Again, high developed economy. GDP matters. If I want to anchor progress based on KDNK, I'll choose Guyana. Because last year, Guyana KDNK GDP increased by 43%. If I want to look at GDP, I look at Indonesia. Indonesia past 10 years, GDP compared to Malaysia grew higher than Malaysia. And you saw what happened in Indonesia last month. People went on the street. So GDP alone is not enough. We have grown, but who benefit from the growth is not to the lower income nor to the middle income. We did a study and we published last year, 2 years ago, published in Journal of Paris School Economics. The government kind enough to give us the raw data of household income, especially on tax data. So we combine both. And we see between 2016 to 2022, the income share of top 1% went up. The income share of top 10% went up. Income share of M40 went down. Income share of B50 remains the same. What does it mean? It means despite the economy has grown so much between 2016 until 2022, the benefit only accrued at the top class of Malaysian household, top 10%. Bottom 90 did not see any improvement. And data from Bank Negara support this. If you look between 2020 to 2024, January to December, in 4 years, wages increased by 7%. Cost of living increased by 9%. If you're low income, you spend more on food. Food costs increased by 17%. In other words, purchasing power decreased, despite the economy is growing. So looking beyond GDP is important. We have to look at poverty, we have to look at inequality, we have to be very ambitious in addressing this. Even if we argue that poverty has decreased, and by all metrics, even if you put PLI higher, it's still like this, it still goes down, which is a great achievement for Malaysia. But certain groups, when you slice it, certain groups experience higher rate of poverty. National poverty rate is 5.1. In Sabah, election very soon, 17%. In Kedah, in Sarawak is 8%. In Kelantan is 12%. That's between states. So huge gap between national and state. And you slice it, Ungku Aziz say focus on rural. Because at the time, majority of Malays in particular in rural. Rural poverty is still high. Current number is about 10%. 10% of Malaysian households live in rural areas considered poor in the year 2024. So rural poverty still remains an issue. And if you say, okay, we're not going to look at absolute poverty, let's look at developed countries that look at relative poverty. And this is one of the proposals that we can make, is that the government not just look at absolute, but look at relative. Relative means half of the median income. If you below that, you consider poor. Median income in Malaysia is about 7,000 per household, half of that 3,500. If you look at median income, anybody below half of median income, developed country OECD use this indicator, relative poverty in Malaysia is about 16.7. It has increased, it did not decrease. What is the gap between 3,500 and 2,700? If you below 2,700, you consider poor. If you below 3,500, you consider relatively poor. That 800 gap is equivalent to close to 1 million household. One household got 3.2, that's 3.2 million Malaysian. They are vulnerable by 800 ringgit. This is how vulnerable we are. And I spoke about this equivalent, you drive a country and your tire bursts. You do not, if you have to spend 800 bucks, and this is the only savings you have, you will be poor. So the point is, even if you're not poor, you are easily fall into poverty. So the issue of poverty, like what Ungku Aziz said, what Zabba said, this library named after him, another great man, I think still exists, and we tend to ignore this. And if you move poverty from purely income, you look at multidimensional poverty, you take in terms of nutrition. The child poverty in Malaysia, we're going to publish very soon. UNICEF gave us agreed to publish our findings on child poverty. We're going to publish very soon. The number is very high in terms of child poverty. In terms of old age poverty, also very high. If you look at nutrition, globally the level of stunting in Malaysia globally has been declining. In Malaysia, kids stunted is the same rate as 1999. 25 years, 26 years, country has progressed so much. And yet the level of progress among our children barely move. And I like what Gandhi said. Gandhi said, you want to see progress, you look at the most deprived, the most vulnerable, these children, and they have not progressed. That in terms of health. In terms of education, that's why I'm very pessimistic. In fact, Look at the SPM results. Those who get, I shared with you the top part during our last session. Those kids, recent result, those who get F in mathematics is 22%. 1 in 5 fail mathematics. But if you take D, E, and F, basically not A, B, C, D, E, and F, that's 50%. 1 in 2 of our brothers and sisters and children who are about to enter labor market. 50% D, and E, and F in mathematics. D, E, and F in English, 40%. D, E, and F in science, 30%. So we already have high gap income inequality. And those who get a benefit letter is not this group who fail. Those small group who succeed very well in math, science, and English. So the gap gonna become wider. That's in terms of education. How do we address this? We roll back a lot of programs. You must spend on basic infra, you must spend on development, you must spend on health, you must spend on education. 13 Malaysian Plan development spending increased by 3 billion per year. But if you look between 2022 to 2024, development expenditure actually decreased, not increased. We're spending less. If you look at health, we have serious health issues. 1 in 2 is fat, 1 in 3 are diabetic. Development expenditure for health. In the recent budget, we increased only by 7 million ringgit. 7 million ringgit increase in development expenditure. At the same time, we spent 500 million ringgit on subsidizing sugar. Our priority got mixed up. I would rather remove 500 million sugar subsidies and add to that 7 million for health development. Build more hospitals is under stress, our healthcare system. So in terms of spending, we're not spending much. And we roll back a lot of programs. Why do I say that there's no future? You look at taxation. Taxation still regressive. Taxation. Now with the new trade deals that we signed, which I encourage all of you to read it, it would not be far-fetched to say this is a Bangkok treaty. We give so much for gaining so little. We roll back a lot. We cannot tax American companies on SSD, American products on SSD, agriculture. We cannot impose digital tax on American companies. We give a lot of leeway. Taxation is not progressive in Malaysia. Then spending the money that we get is also not progressive. Bulk of social assistance go for RON 95 for fuel subsidy. For every 100, we spend about 11 billion. For every 100 ringgit that's spent on RON 95 fuel subsidy, B20 got 4 ringgit. Top 20 got 42 ringgit. If I get 11 billion, I'd rather give to the poor than go to the rich. Why my club get less than me? It's unfair. If you remove for top 20%, I'll say about 8 billion ringgit that I can use for the poor, for the education, expand scholarship program. That is on RON 95. The second spending that we did, also regressive, is the 100 ringgit for everybody. Topa got 100 ringgit, I got 100 ringgit, Prof. Zack got 100 ringgit, everybody got 100 ringgit. Vincent Tan got 100 ringgit. The money that we do not have, Malaysia borrow entirely, almost entirely development expenditure to finance, and yet we are kind enough to spend 2.2 last year, 2.2 this year, to give to benefit the rich. So to address this is what I will quote what, I'll finish very soon. I quote what Zabba said, that kemiskinan yang kita ada ni bukan kemiskinan daripada apa yang Ungku Aziz cakap, but kemiskinan daripada apa Zabba cakap, kemiskinan jiwa. How we look at poverty. We don't have the mental capacity to say that this is the right thing to do. We're not kemiskinan cita-cita. We're not ambitious enough. Because the way we look at the poor is wrong. I cannot give you, and Amata said development is freedom. We don't give freedom to the poor. I give you money, you can only buy selected things. because I don't trust you as selected shop, because I don't trust you. There's no proof. It's only khayalan ataupun hurafat that the poor doesn't know how to manage finances. We follow the poor during COVID. This study funded by UNICEF and UNFPA. In all the low-cost flat in KL, representative study. They got a lot of assistance at the time. We checked over the period of time. Longitudinal study. We said, what do you use your money for? They use on two things. They use on barang dapur, on food, and second, they use on children education. There's no significant evidence that they abuse the cash assistance or the assistance that they receive. There's no evidence that the poor do not know what is best for them. But yet we decide, I'll give you this, you only buy selected things. Despite that, if Makcik Kia want to spend something else, we say you cannot. So we don't give freedom to the poor on what best for them. So another proposal, policy proposal, top is here. Cash assistance should be decided by the poor. We should not limit SARA that only they can buy certain things. They know what is best for them, not us, not Putrajaya. So cash assistance should be a freedom of the recipient. And number three, the spending must be progressive. The revenue must be progressive. Then you address inequality. Otherwise, when we have this talk again in 2030 or next year, the same issue will progress. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Muhammad Abdul Khalid, for your insightful and inspiring session. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now to move to this forum session. I'm pleased to invite our moderator, Yang Berusaha, Mr.
Dr. Sharifah Fatimah Al-Zahra Syed Hussein and Mr. Azlan Shah Nabis Khan. Thank you very much for coming. Distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum and a very good morning to everyone. Today we gathered not only to discuss poverty, but to rediscover dignity. As the Royal Professor Ungku Aziz often reminded us that the true measure of development lies not in the size of one's income, but in the wholeness of one's humanity. As we look at Malaysia today with rising urban inequality, invisible poverty, and fractured solidarities, we return to Ungku Aziz's question: what does it mean to develop without dehumanizing? So this forum, the hidden dimensions of poverty, is to revisit Ungku Aziz's ideas in modern Malaysia. So we deeply honored this morning to be joined by three distinguished panelists, each representing a vital dimension of what Royal Professor Ungku Aziz called the tree of development, with roots in ethics, intellect and community. So our first panelist, Professor Dr. Fatimah Kari, the Honorary Professor at the Faculty of Business and Economics, University Malaya, and the former director of the Ungku Aziz Center for Development Studies. Prof. Fatimah's work has long explored the intersections between poverty, environmental sustainability, and rural livelihoods. Her scholarship continues the intellectual tradition of Royal Professor Ungku Aziz by bridging data with humanity and economics with ethics. So I welcome the first panelist, Prof. Fatimah. I have a question for you. Ungku Aziz reminded us that poverty is not the only economic, but cultural and moral. How might we reimagine the Sarong Index today to capture Malaysia's evolving hidden poverty, especially in urban and digital economies?
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Center. Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Datuk Seri Mustafa Muhammad dan Datin Sri Suhaiza. Thank you for the invitation. I mean, I have retired for a long while and I'm enjoying the retirement life. And suddenly this invitation came my way. I said, okay, have I got anything new to say? In what Dr. Muhammad have said, look grim. Well, there's something else beyond that, you know. The grimness is probably it has to do with the way academicians did work in the area of poverty. I think we are equally guilty, you know, in the way we do the work and the way we put across the work. And no wonder we deserve the title of all the kangkong in the world that we have. But all is not that grim. You know, I mean, I believe that whatever research, especially USC has done, we must start looking at it in a different way now. It must have an impact. It must be on the forefront. It must explore all the frontiers. And I think today's event is an evidence that the debate must continue. The solution may not be there. But in all my years, as a person who had to go to the field to collect data, and never had the luxury to be given data by docent, I think the solution at the grassroots is obvious. You know, when we talk about the state, we talk about the market, we talk about the policy, when everything else fails, then the community have to pick it up on their own term, on their own strength. Right? Dr. Safiq's presentation on the meta-economics, I think it helped me today in answering your question. Yeah? Meta-economics, when you translate it at the community level, you see wonders out there. When some community did really develop something without government help. Right? That's a model that we should be searching for. Where are the communities that work toward their alleviation of poverty in which minimal government help? Is there any? Yeah, I'm going to share some of that in my own work. Like I said, if you do poverty work, you are not going to the field and just depending on the data. It's not going to work. You know, that's part of the problem. Right? Having to go to the field really means to bring the real actual time data, whether to publication or to the policy makers. Now, I'm sorry I take a little bit of time in introduction. Let me answer your question in the light that Sarong Index, it was first published in 1964 in the journal, right? This is where I think I will challenge you a little bit, Dr. Safiq. Pak Ungku is a real economist in that sense, and the way we economists look at it, yeah. By 1972, the idea of Sarong Index was already incorporated into our poverty line index by virtue of the fact that Sarong Index represents the basic needs of the poor household in terms of the food consumptions. Right? This is not something that has been researched quite a lot in terms of ideas and whatnot. That's why I've been pushing the Department of Economics in University of Malaya to offer the course in History of Economic Thought in which Pak Ungku's ideas must be in the syllabus. We don't depend on the Western to provide us with the framework. They are equally lost in whatever that we want to do. You know, it must be rooted in the local context. That's what we want. Inshallah, I think the ongoing syllabus adjustment will incorporate all that, apart from Keynes, apart from Marx and all the great ideas from the West. I'm not saying that they can be honorable, but at least the alternative of having to put Ungku Aziz as one of the topic in the syllabus must be made as soon as possible. Now, in the realm of things, I think the mistake when Pak Ungku put up the Sarong Index in 1964 and Amartya Sen won the Nobel Prize in 1980, by virtue of the Nobel Prize in Economics on capability and basic needs. And by 1997, Sabrina Akaya developed the MPI index. If you look at the two ideas behind Pak Ungku, that's exactly Sarong index. The only mistakes that we, the economists in Malaysia, made then was not to translate it into figures, to convince the world that that is the alternative, that is the things that Pak Ungku is talking about. We missed just that. So, you know, my answer to most of the things that you are going to ask me or going to sort of present today is very empirical. I'm a very empirical person. I go to the field and prove it. Where is the data? This is how the data looks like. So if I can put up just one more minute, yeah? If I can put up my slide. The slide, please. This one. Right. Where does the poverty line index in terms of Sarong index come in? It's basically in terms of the nutritional requirement as far as we're concerned, right? This is where I think during your time, Dato' Sri, a lot of methodological improvement have been made in terms of first in terms of the quality of the nutrition, and two, in terms of the food parameter has been improved by DOSM then. All for the reason that you talk about poverty, it must fulfill the basic needs of the poor family, all right? However, if we look at fast forward, my concern is this. We have been using poverty line and adjusting it from time to time in terms of the methodology. The next challenge that we have is on two fronts. If you don't address it, I will be as gloomy as what Dr. Muhammad has mentioned. One is on the idea of price. How do we tackle cost of living in affecting the poverty line itself? Because cost of living, prices of food, inflation is going to be the issue that we are facing now and going to face for the future, and it's ongoing. Now, DOSM has not come up with any option in terms of how do we sort of adjust the existing poverty line as an improvement into the methodology in terms of adjusting the price changes, cost of living index. Now, I am glad to say that we did that for Sarawak in our recently concluded studies. This is what we call the meta-economic. We respond to the problem. You know, we address it in the sense that the cost of living index must be factored in. So I think Sarawak by now already have a PLI in which is adjusted by cost of living index. So that's one structural improvement that we need to look at. For the poor family are struggling with food bills on the way. The other thing, I will address it in my last slide later on, and that is where I wanted to sort of look at the meta-economic as well, right? Is the question of climate change, which poses a very difficult question in terms of the victim and the flood, the extreme drought, which affect the vulnerable group. So one proposal that is being highly debated now is how do you sort of integrate the idea of climate change, the crisis that we are facing now in terms of climate change, into the existing poverty line index, so that it is something that is futuristic in terms of its structure and whatnot. So again, just to conclude, bear in mind, the Sarong index was already factored into our PLI way back in 1972 as a response of what Ungku Aziz recommend as the basic needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fatima. So I forgot to explain. First, I will ask each panelist a question, then we will revisit again. So now we move to the second panelist, Mr. Azlan Shah Nafis Khan, the CEO from Arba Foundation. Under his leadership, Arba has championed child-centered programs in health, education and empowerment to break intergenerational poverty. So I think this is a very important realities in today's social challenges. Your foundation has been working with children, families, and vulnerable groups. So I think it might be from your experience, what are the hidden barriers that prevent people like former detainees or people with disabilities from truly rebuilding their life?
Right, thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Assalamualaikum and a very good morning. First of all, Datuk Sri Mustafa, Prof. Professor, and Dr. Shafiq. I started my career as a banker for almost 8 years. I'm graduated from the course Combined Sharia, Economic and Islamic Finance. So I spent almost a decade in an industry which hoards wealth and rich the richer. So and then I took a break. I joined a UNICEF research titled Child Marriage in Malaysia. So I traveled across Peninsula in Sabah Sarawak, and then I discovered the dimension of poverty, especially experienced by children, that I never knew before. And then I decided to resign. And then the very first report that I read and inspired us to design a solution was a report did by Dr. Muhammad Khalid, titled Children Without, 2018. So straight away I tried to get his contacts and we met. And then one of the first recommendations put under that report was to address stuntedness among children in Malaysia. We need to encourage exclusive or breastfeeding support. So we designed a project, it's called Project Susu Ibu. So we went to KKM and then we tried to bridge to help mothers data from Klinik Kesihatan from the district that has the highest rates of stuntedness, and the project is still running in Kota Baru, Kelantan, because it is highest in Semenanjung in Kota Baru. So along the way, 6 years has passed. We have developed a few projects which try to cater another dimension that we found. So we started with a premise that poverty is not lack of character, but it is lack of cash. But after 6 years, I think it's a lack of character, but not of the poor, but of those who has access to the wealth and those who manage the distribution of wealth. And it gets clearer and clearer as we continue to work. So from the question, I can tell you from an experience, almost visiting houses from different demographics, urban, rural, Felda, Kampung, and then also we had some projects in Sabah Sarawak, but we decided not to continue, but only focus in Labuan because our foundation was registered at Labuan. So I can see how children especially, even though we have programs like monthly cash assistance that we have been giving them for the past 2 years, there are many other elements that put them in a condition that cash alone is not enough. It's not only about the material capital, but it is also the social capital. The kind of interaction networks, where they go to school, who are their friends, who are their neighbors, what kind of experience and family setup they are being brought up in. And I can share some of the experience even when Prof. Fatimah Kari mentioned about the climate. We only realize that when we sponsor them, give them cash, and then they buy all these equipments to start business. When the monsoon season comes, not only they cannot do their business or run their business, their equipments also get spoiled because of the floods and whatnot. So we kind of see that, oh, okay, this is another area that we never realized before. And then even for those who sells goreng pisang and all this kuih, weather is very important to them. It's very sensitive. If it rains, if it's a gloomy day, then even when it's the payday and whatnot, everything is affecting their business and their incomes. So and then we kind of discovered more, right? We have children, just now Prof. Khalid mentioned about the SPMs. So we found that, oh, there are issues of, they are in the school. We studied the multidimensional poverty measurement index. We have one of the areas is access to the school. But when we go deeper, we found that they have the access to the school, but they are experiencing poverty in the school. poverty in learning in the school. They are left behind. Most of the parents, when we ask why your son or your daughter is 9, 10, 11 but still struggles to spell and read. So they said it has been the case for the past few years, but we couldn't get enough support. And then eventually these children, they drop out after primary school. And we even have cases that we try to keep them in school, complete SPM, but they get so much of F and gagal and whatnot. And we can already see the grimness of what is waiting ahead. Barely can get any job. And what adds to that is if they are coming from certain ethnicity background, they grew up very angry because they have been seen by people in a certain way. They have been stereotyped. That we have, even when we try to move them to a house, because they were staying with relatives, and they have disabled child who is always struggling in that kind of condition, so we try to move them to their own apartment. But when they try to reach to all these homeowners who publicize that they want to rent their house, but when they know, oh, these people is from certain ethnic background or certain religion background, they decline. I respect that preference, but I try to call them and also try to negotiate. And they give certain reasons that make me feel, is this the lack of character of the poor, or is this the lack of character of us that has the access to help them? And some of the homes are being signed the agreement with my name, because otherwise it's very difficult for them to get those houses rented. And that is in terms of education, and we try to develop programs that we can tell the child is not interested per se, but they have so many factors that makes them struggle in school. They come from a home that the parents are always fighting. They are literally physical abuse every day. They come from a home that they are hungry, so they go to school, they cannot really keep up with the pace, and in a very competitive environment that we have created nowadays, even from kindergarten. So even children without noted that 51% of children from low-income households do not attend early childhood education centers. So they straight away start at standard 1 while have no ability to read or write, even recognizing the alphabets. While others who already started, it's already like, nowadays the interviews to get to standard 1 is probably you can write a journal already. So that's scary, right? So, but it's not merciful to those children that are deprived. And we also experience a lot of families that one of their family members are drug addict or get detained. Not only the family is traumatized, the children are traumatized, the entire neighborhood boycott them. And when the mother is a single mother, try to put up a business and try to sell things, they don't support them. That's what we found. And then we try to go deeper into how is your family support. Most of the time, I think we don't have that. Just now I saw that Dr. Shafiq mentioned about how Prof. Ungku said that it is religious, spiritual, it is ta'awun. I think it's not only at the national level that we are lack of this idea of ta'awun, helping each other, even inside the family setting as well. For example, I would argue that no orphan should be sent to an orphanage. It should be a family responsibility. That what is the premise of the Quran anyway, but that is not in the forefront of our mindset or thinking or psyche. So there are a lot more to unpack, but I can tell that what I believe at this point, the more we give them access to social capital, sometimes they just need one person to give them access. I even just now contacted one of our family in Walustar and asked, who else from your school that get into university? Because one of that child, we sponsored him to get to the university, and we fully cover everything, like the fees, the allowance and whatnot. And from that demographic, we found that many of them, if not all of other friends, did not got any access to university. And it's just like that boy was lucky because somehow we found him. And that access gave him so much. And I also reflected, even me coming from a private school and whatnot, I can tell even now among my cliques, my friends, their career are very much determined with or measured by their parents or their circle's social capital. Some of them get interns in very decent, very normal place. Some of them straight away get access to certain offices that, and then jump ahead in their career. So this social dimension, that is what I think we need to give more attention towards. And on the final note, I like the idea that Dr. Makali said that the poor are intelligent. They know how to manage funds, which is also one of the things I learned recently is when we give them 450 ringgits unconditional cash transfer, but we track. So what they do, when they get any kind of other assistance that is conditional, they allocate that conditional for that conditional expenditure, and then they use the unconditional money or whatever income they have for the other expenditure. So they kind of manage, they know how to manage. So I think, one, we don't underestimate their capacity to manage, and that is very important because the moment, as Prof. Khalid said, when we don't trust them, they also don't trust us. So I think that would be the start of this conversation, and we can continue with the inshallah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Azlan. I think there is a very, very great effort that has been done by you. So thank you very much. We move to the third panelist, Assistant Professor Dr. Sharifah Fatimah Az-Zahra Said Hussein. Dr. Sharifah Fatimah Az-Zahra is the Assistant Professor at the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at IIUM, International Islamic University, Malaysia. Her research focuses on gender, kinship and social inequality, illuminating how poverty is experienced within families, identities and everyday struggles. So my question for Dr. Sharifah Fatimah: how do gender and kinship structures shape hidden poverty today, especially among women-headed households or informal caregivers?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you so much, moderator, Topa, Prof, other keynote speakers and my fellow panelists, and also the audience today. I think I feel very fortunate to come last because everybody set the stage already for me. I think the first is to recognize that we can understand development and economics beyond the monetary material measures that we are used to. And I think to recognize that this is not the only measure and this should not be the only measure. And I think it is also important to say it plainly that which one is the goal and which one is the means. I think the measurement of the material is only the means that we measure. That should not be the goal. But I think we've lost sight of that. We tend to measure and work towards the material in all aspects, whether it is in our policy, in the way that we have embraced certain ethics and how we do things, whether it is our academics and our policymakers. And that's why coming from a sociological background, we're always critical about economists because there are so much nuance and also ethics as well as lived experience that are lost in the measurement of numbers, because there is no question of why we are measuring these numbers and why do we chase these numbers. So I think when we say hidden dimension of poverty, it is also recognizing that the definition of poverty must be clear. And I think it is so limited to measure poverty only by absolutes and relative economic measures, including the multidimensional poverty index, because it misses things like what as I mentioned, which is the social capital, which is only one dimension of the hidden aspect of poverty. And we know that there are so many challenges, just like Dr. Shafiq mentioned on the collectiveness, right, on issues of people coming together as a corporation to elevate themselves. And I respect Prof. Fatimah, who actually connected me to UAC, in thinking about or talking about how it's important for people to be not reliant on government, but I think it's important to recognize that the government has a strong influence and decision on the structure, because what happens, and gender is a case, I think, to give an example of how this inequality is structured within the system. And the government plays a role to disrupt the structure or to design a structure that doesn't allow for inequalities to happen, not just poverty, but inequalities. So in the case of women, of course we know that the unequal structure or system is patriarchy, meaning to say that there are gaps in our system that does not address the needs of women based on their life experiences. So in the case of women in Malaysia, for example, and I draw from Dr. Khalid's research on living on the edge, female-headed household in the study of PPR communities represented 54% of the poor communities. That's more than half, right? So, because we can understand that, if we think about the social and cultural aspects of our lives, women and girls in our lives take on the unpaid and undervalued work, whether it is in the formal or whether it's in the private sector or informal sector. Most of the work that is done, that is undervalued and underpaid, but is absolutely essential in the running of our lives, are done by women. For example, we all need to wash laundry. We all need to eat at home, for example. We all need somebody to take care of our sick, our young children. These are essentials. These are not extra. And if no one does it, the world cannot run. People cannot go to work. If today somebody who works in the care aspect of the familiar life decides to go on strike, the world will be on halt, because nobody can go to work if nobody's taking care of a sick person or a child or doing the housework or feeding the family. So this undervalued and underpaid are taken care of by women. But when it's a women or female-headed household, they have to think about doing two things at once. And I think the other missing question or aspect of poverty that's often not discussed is time. And the capitalist system really takes away time from those who are in a particular socioeconomic group, because it's the time that's taken away from them, because the value of their work is less. So they experience time poverty, and women especially experience time poverty. That's why we have cases of women in lower income who not only work multiple jobs, but they come home and do a third shift, right? 2 shifts at work, because they're underpaid for the work that they do, but in order to sustain their family, they have to do a third shift. And sometimes they don't do the third shift because they already work 2 jobs. So the third shift is undertaken by the first daughter or the eldest daughter, who has to sacrifice their education, right? To stay at home, take care of the other kids or the other children, make sure they go to school. So it's structured. It is not accidental. This is why we say that the role of policymakers are important to ensure that this structure is in place. And I want to highlight, for example, one of the work that we do is on menstrual poverty. And like the Sarong Index, it considers how we think about people's lives and how the material world is one indicator to identify the dignity of the people and the ability of the people to maintain their dignity. And half of our population are women, and half of us menstruate for 40 years of our lives. So this is not it's not a small issue. It affects us in a great way. It affects our population in a great way. And yet we don't talk about it, we don't think about it. So not being able to manage our menstruation in children means not being able to go to school. So if girls menstruate for 5 days a month, they don't go to school for 5 days a month. In 1 year, that's about 2 months or 1.5 months of missing out on their curriculum, right? But we don't measure that because we don't think about it. So in thinking about people's lives and dignities, we must consider these things and think about how they are actually structured within our system. And there are gaps in the ways that we understand the world. So I just want to highlight a little bit what it looks like. Just like Prof. Fatima, I like to collect data on the field. So I'm grateful to UAC for providing us a small grant this year and last year, where we were lucky to have a child participatory research. So we actually talked to children about their lives at the PPR. So life goes something like this. For some children, they wake up at 5 in order to cook breakfast for everybody, all the younger siblings, so everybody gets to bring food to school. And for some, waking up at 5 means I can catch the bus and the train and another bus to go to the school that I want, that has the education that I'm looking for, which is for rugby, for sports. So he got into the school. But for some, it's waking up 5, preparing food for everybody. And on the way to school, and many PPRs have broken lifts, going down the stairs means I may be molested on the way down just to go to school. This is not material measurement, this is experiential things. Imagine your child or my child going to school being harassed before you get to school, right? So it's not just about not being able to read and write, but this is the experience that I have to go through before I get to school. And then going to school, my parents didn't give me money yet because they don't have the money to give me to buy the books for the starting of the school year. So my teacher will ask me, where's your notebook? Where's your exercise book? How do I respond to that in front of everybody in the class? Right? So there is that constant microaggressions, or how we say it, the experience of a child experiencing school in poverty. And I only have this allocation of money to eat in school. So I don't use it because I want to save it later so that I can spend good time with my friends. Because everybody gets to buy something after school when we sit together. And I don't want to go home because home is not safe. Home is not comfortable. Home is where there's a lot of fights. There's a lot of violence. So I stay outside until it's night time. Then I'll go home just to sleep and wake up again at 5. That's a lived experience. That's not even thinking about whether they ate, right? Whether they have extra resources, whether they're wearing clothes from when. And when we ask them, what do you dream about? What do you want? I really just want my family to be happy, and I really want for us to go and eat outside. KFC. Just to go and have KFC with my family. That's dignity. That's life growing up. And in today's world, children mostly have access to a smartphone. That means they don't just see what's around them, they also see what other people have. And I think that builds also that feeling of anger, right? And I think that's another issue that we need to think about. These are social dimensions of our lives that are not just accidental, it's structured. Just like how we put 20,000 people living in poverty in the same area, as opposed to in our kampung, where we can have a collective because keluarga orang kaya boleh sponsor anak orang miskin, take care of each other. But now you can't. Your neighbor is in debt, you are in debt, that household didn't eat, there's a drug addict in this floor, and then another floor. We're all staying in the same location. We design the infrastructure that people live in the same socio-economic group in the same place. How do you get out of that together, right? This is structured. So I want to highlight that it is not accidental, but it is structured, whether it's gender-based, whether it's economic-based, whether it's disability issue, for example. There are overrepresentation of disabled family-headed household as well. So there are vulnerabilities that somehow our system lumps everybody up. So it's hard to be self-reliant and come out together when the system continuously, adds to the problem of that. So I think I will start with that. I don't think it's grim. It is grim as it is. But I have a more, maybe because I'm younger, I'm more optimistic about life. And how we have a responsibility to feel empowered about what we know, to do something about it. Yeah, so I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sharifah Fatimah. So we will move to the second question for Professor Dr. Fatimah. This is about ethics. Ungku Aziz saw ethics and faith as the roots of the development, and is not as the obstacles to progress. In your view, how can contemporary economic policies in Malaysia incorporate these roots without sacrificing competitiveness or innovation? And if there are any examples from your research where ethical economics produce better development outcomes? Please, Prof. Fatimah.
Thank you, Harry. Before I address to your question, let me taper back. Okay. The idea about figures and data in economics is quite straightforward. It's very objective. When you present figures to the policymaker, even though how stupid they are, they tend to agree, yes, the data makes sense. Yeah, that's one. The other thing is, I think it's high time for us to work on poverty on a multidisciplinary basis. You can't stand on your own. It has to be engagement from all the other disciplines. But of course, if you start working in this manner, you have economists, you have sociologists, anthropologists, you have the medical team and whatnot. Your ego seems to be on your own. But when you look at figures, when we connect through figures, then it makes sense for us to look at the problem in a much more objective way, in a much more solving type of environment. How to solve it? At the end of the day, that great minds work together when they look at figures, and I think that's the way how I look at figures. Of course, the greatest sin, dosa yang paling tinggi dalam academician juga ialah berselindung di sebalik data berkenaan. That's for sure. Yeah? And worse, among the economists, you tend to put on fancy modeling. Nobody understands that. Right? So that's the difficulty. But that's the freedom that we have as an academician to work on it. Now, the other thing, okay, let me address to your question on the idea of justice and growth. Now, the idea about trickle-down growth is done, finished. There is no more things that we can believe in. I mean, if you are like me, who take development economics in the late 1970s, you talk about nothing else except trickle-down. What a beautiful theory, that take you out of the gloom and dooms of the dunya, But it got blown away. It is no longer there. I mean, with the work of Timothy Piketty in 2004, capitalism is out. With the work of Darren Ackmelo, who won the Nobel Prize in 2024, it's out. So the failure of trickle-down is real. Market fails, policy fails, so who else is going to stand up? Now, that's a great challenge for all of us, especially in the academic world, to put a debate on it and to sort of, especially my PhD students who are here, take a little bit of time to debate about this thing. Don't just go straight into the modeling and present it to me and to us, to the committee, and say that's the greatest model in the world. It worked, it will solve all the problems. It doesn't work that way. It must have the preamble to all the discussion of where theory failed, where policy failed, where market failed, and all that. Then it becomes a good perspective to sort of teach us at certain situation. It may work, but not the other way around. Now, just to be in the group, right, to address your question, I would rather put the empirical evidence here rather than to sort of talk out of the prehend. I'm going to touch on education as well. Can I have my slide, please? Now, the things that we did at one point of time was to look at social mobility index through education. Now, that's very disturbing, So the work was diamanahkan kepada saya, but it was during COVID. Okay. I hope YB Nurul will be pleased with me to share this. Anyway, that the work has already been published, and so it's no longer a problem actually. Now, what we did is to look at social mobility index to education. The exercise is very simple. Compare the first child, second child, third child, and compare how they are in terms of their parent education. Just simple matching. If I graduate with a bachelor degree, will my son be able to match that up, or lower or higher? As simple as that. So we took the threshold of 0.5, right? And then we took the measure of if If it's at 0, if it's 1, therefore anything above 5 will be a good mobility to look at. Anything below 5 will be something to think about. Now, the data here is quite shocking, you know. For the whole sample, look at how all the, I think if you are a teacher, you tend to do this all the time, you know. For the whole sample, look at all the negative, oops. Right. Sorry about that. No wonder everybody goes as AI nowadays, you know, it will solve all this problem of that technical issue. All right, look at the whole sample, it's very disturbing. First child, second child goes negative. Therefore they are performing worse than it is. They will look at the male-headed household, we are talking about the same thing, in which some, first child, second child goes to the negative zone in terms of the development. And if you look at the female-headed household, now it gets a little bit later in the number of children, and it's sort of, is this sensitive to touch?
Dia anu lah. Tolong.
This technology scares me, you know. Okay, look at how it goes into the negative zone. Now, the other things that is, apart from the fact that yes, male-headed household and female-headed household differ in terms of the performance, and it's much more negative than we thought in the current situation. And look at the 3 dunes here. They are all urban constitution. I thought that education is a public goods. When you talk about public goods in economics, you talk about externality. Externality, which means that when you start the ball rolling, it will roll and it will sort of get better in terms of externality in the positive sense. Right? Just like health. If I am healthy, my family is healthy, the rest of the community is healthy. Same goes to education. If one child is doing good, parent is doing good, first one is doing good, second one is doing good, and the rest are also doing equally well. So the question is, why is that education in this setting not a public goods that we always believe it to be, right? Despite all the investment. But again, the question of how regressive the performance of the kids as far as the B40 are concerned. So these are going to be big issue here, and how can this cycle, intergenerational poverty, can be addressed through education. Now Now the other one that sort of come into my research prior to this is this. When you talk about the digital network setting that we're having, or the ICT to address the poverty problems in this country, right? And you have all the program in terms of long life learning. Okay, that one. Okay, when you have all the ICT component in the society, right? Whether you talk about technology-based, whether you talk about government project, whether you talk about connectedness, whether you talk about long life learning to distant learning, then when you look at how performance in terms of education, right, below SPM and above, and you will notice that those who have a much relatively higher education are much more better off in terms of understanding the government projects wherever they are, especially in the digital network. So that is going to be critical in terms of how we look at education in addressing poverty. Now the other things that we also do on the same indicator is looking at income and poverty, on how aware they are in terms of project awareness. If we look at income, above there, the figure indicates it has a very positive relationship in terms of how aware they are in terms of the project awareness. However, poverty tends to be regressive in the way they react toward government programs that they are putting to them. Those are set up, that the work that we have done are set up within the digital network in which the government put up some strong infrastructure for digital connectedness just to address the community. So, of course, this is quite specific. One have to look at the context of it, but as far as this evidence is concerned, addressing poverty through digital network is not as straightforward as what we think. However, as what we have seen again and again, education remains to be crucial in every sense of the word. And I think a lot more, let's do this, all right? Whatever research that you do in the future, never leave education behind, because that is the connectedness in that, all right? Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Fatima. So I think the key here is education. So we'll move for the second question for Mr. Azlan. Ungku Aziz, or we call him as Pak Ungku, viewed development as a moral duty to ensure that no one is left behind. So my question is, in that spirit, what lesson has Arba learned about creating genuinely inclusive programs, especially for those who are systemically overlooked, such as families with disabled children or minority communities struggling to rent homes? But actually, Mr. Azhar has partially answered the question in the first session.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Coming from the inputs given by our esteemed panelists, for the past 6 years, that is the truth that we found a lot of single mothers heading households. So the easier narrative is men are useless in that sense. But the more deeper I go into that subject, I found that there is a growing research in the Western part of the world that looking deeper into the man crisis. Why we are facing such a systematic structural decline of men and boys, which actually leads to a lot of issues, including income levels, social capitals in terms of giving protection and whatnot. Though in the Islamic scripture there is a very strong emphasis, even one of the final advice or warning that Prophet Muhammad gave before he passed away, he said that I give you a strong reminder to take care of women and children. And when we analyze that context, he was talking to strong men that went to hunt, men worked, men went to wars and whatnot, that their primary priority is to ensure women and children. In one of the quotes that Dr. Khalid mentioned just now, one of the ways us to measure the future is to look at what is the condition of children in the country. So our daily interaction with children is actually a bit depressing in terms of these struggles, in terms of academic achievement, in terms of even if you read the stats of bullies, there is a specific data in terms of youth bullies. We are ranked number 2 in the world. Generally speaking, cyberbully, we are top 10 in the world. And I think you don't even need to have the data or stats. You just need to experience social media for a while, and you can tell. So these children, even there are books and research nowadays that looking deeper into the anxious generation, the children experience nowadays with digital connectivity almost all the time. And one of the programs that I regret personally, that we gave out a lot of smartphones when it was a pandemic, and for PDPR, of course, we gave with right intention, but when we measure longer time, we found that probably that is not the best idea. And most of them, even when you ask about disabled children, just last 2 days we had a meeting with UAC. We are developing a center to help autism children from B40 families to get access for therapy and whatnot, because the queue, the access to clinic, the cost to go and whatnot is high and long, the queue is long. But one thing we found that from our experience in JB, in Pahang, in Perak, in Johor is, even though they might have enough income, but when they are being tested with disabled children, even one, what more if 2 or 3 children that has autism or different kind of challenges, they tend to lock the child in the room, and most of the time given any kind of screen so that they can basically survive, because it's a very difficult situation, no support. And one of the experience I went in JB, I went to a low-cost area. While we are speaking, the kid was banging the door to get out of the home and just to go to play at the playground. But the mom said, I said, why are you restricting the child? Because when he goes out, he will beat someone, and the whole apartment will be speaking about us having anak gila and whatnot. So even the parents are very affected by that. So that is one angle that we are talking and trying to explore what are the options, even with the state government, so that we can help, because the cases of children facing difficulties in learning, children facing different kind of challenges is at rise, it's increasing. Another angle is when I touched about the man crisis is, the more I research and study and meet with scholars, I found certain fundamental changes need to be done into the education system, which is not designed to help boys from the very early on. So normally when I experienced this from my childhood, that penceramah motivasi will always say, budak perempuan will go to university, budak lelaki will go to pusat serenti. So it was a joke back then, though I don't laugh at much of that joke. But when I think about it, because we deal with a lot of fathers came out from pusat serenti and tahanan and whatnot, when they try to get a job, they only can survive until someone discovered that they were penagih dadah. Even though they have recovered, but they will be terminated. So we have cases in Temerloh, is it? In Temerloh, repeatedly being fired, and then, you know what the father did? He left and abandoned the family and just went away. He just couldn't take it anymore. And there is a book I just read recently, Tightrope. The title is Tightrope, The Struggles of Middle Class or Working Class in America, written by Nicholas Kristof and with his wife Cheryl Woodoon. They have books, several books on poverty and the hidden dimension of poverty. They explore the social aspects, the dimension that is not captured by the numbers. So one of the things that they found is staggering is how men, when they start from the school days, they are being left out in the classroom. And there's another book, The Fall of Boys and Men, Richard Reeves, which studies, and I didn't realize that, I think all of us can attest to this, that most of our teachers are women. Lack of men teachers, right? Kindergarten, primary school, secondary school. Even there is some men teachers, they are there to beat us, or to rotan us, right? So while the psychology of boy especially, they are not, their growing design is through mentorship, through attachment to a man. So when we go to houses that are fatherless, almost every time we can see the boys are the most deprived. They're angry, they easily tend to get influenced by whatever they are among the friends, among the seniors and whatnot. And I also had session with children, they call it kanak-kanak ataupun remaja yang berkonflik dengan undang-undang juvenile. So they commit certain kind of crime, but they are underage. So when I get given a session to talk to them, I ask questions rather than talking. So when we discovered their childhood, most of them didn't have any father role or involved father or a mentor that can help. And yeah, they're pretty much naive. They found it like, I might be accepted, validated, and seem cool if I do certain kind of things. And then they end up in a place where they gather all of children that of alike, same. So instead of getting recovered and helped out, they create a national network of more doing things that is conflicting with the law. So I think, yeah, we have women ministries, we have a lot of women empowerment work, and sometimes when we say that we need also to look into the boys and the men, people will laugh. Come on, you guys, that's not going to solve. I think fundamentally that is what's important right now. If we live like this, I mean, like, I think you just need to do a simple survey, go to school, meet the counselors, and ask them, how are the boys in the school nowadays? And you can tell a lot. And these books written on psychology, on education, emphasize that boys especially, though we tend to think women are sensitive, boys are more sensitive than girls. And when they are deprived, they cannot get into the economic system and be a provider as being expected. So when they are struggling, they get mocked as well. So they don't know what to do. So there is also a crisis. And working class, just now Prof. Makalay also said that there is a group that their incomes are declining or not improving. So what we found from our interactions for the past 6 years, the qualification that they have did not qualify them for a gradual increase in their income. They always have to trade off with time. If you want more money, if you want to get paid more, you do more job. So they will be away more from family, and some of them get to the extent of getting burnt out and struggling in that sense. And we just last week visited a family. The father just passed away, leaving 6 children, and as Dr. Fatima said, the eldest is now at the junction of taking care of the siblings or pursuing studies, and so we promised that we will pay whatever the fees that continue studies and whatnot. But the story of that dad was he was so stressed out working, and then he resigned, and then he became a e-hailing driver, and worked long hours, try to cover the cost and whatnot. But yeah, the salary is not increasing, the cost of living is rising, and the society is not assessing and understanding the struggles that this kind of people face. So I think, yeah, the approach for the future is multidisciplinary. It should be including economics, sociology, psychology, and a lot of stuff, which, and then I can see, because we have certain narrative among religious background people that poverty alleviation or eradication is not fundamental, kind of like we're not going to solve the poverty, while our fundamental teachings is prayer and social justice, zakah, prayer and social justice. It always tied together. And the first challenges after the death of the Prophet was when certain group claimed that we are not going to pay zakah, we're just going to focus on prayer. And then the first caliph that replaced the Prophet fought that, because fundamentally, being a Muslim, especially in the Malaysian context, Muslim majority country, social justice is the identity of that religious belief. To be faithful is to always uphold the social justice principles, not just spirituality and all this alone. It must come with social justice. I think that is what Prof. Ungku unpacked and presented to us 30, 40 years back. I think I just started to understand now, after 40 years, what he has said earlier. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Azlan. So my second question for Dr. Sharifah Fatimah. Ungku Aziz, he viewed poverty as not only material but moral and cultural. So from a sociological perspective, how do cultural notions of malu, which is shame, or harga diri, self-worth, affect our ability to measure and address poverty authentically?
Okay, thank you so much for the question. I want to thank Azad for highlighting the challenges of the crisis of men, because when we talk about gender, we're not just talking about women, but we're also talking about men and how it affects our voice. So I appreciate that. Often there's not enough time to highlight both sides of the story, and it's a really important aspect of that. So I want to try to tackle this in terms of thinking about, and I go back to Sazan just now, because when we think about the conditions of the poor, it's as though we're not thinking about what is surrounding them and the context of it. So it's going back to the idea of the structure, or the social structure as well. So when we think about malu, or when we think about the idea of dignity, or there is another word that I want to highlight, or another term, which is deservedness. And I think this goes into a lot of our context of policy making, right? We often think about the poor as though, and I think this relates to a lot of the conversations we're having today, is as though they are less human than us. And the discovery that they know how to manage their money and that they are able to figure out how to use their money is a slap to the face, because it's as though you are less human than me, therefore I'm surprised that you know how to use your money properly, or I'm surprised that you know how to take care of things. So I think that is fundamental, just like how we think about issues of other vulnerabilities, of, for example, gender. It is as though we think less of a particular group because they carry a certain identity. So that's important. And because of that, that affects how we make policies and how we structure programs and how we think what programs will be effective. So the human dignity or the human value is pegged with certain notions of either malu for the part of those who experience poverty, or deservedness for both parts, whether the system feel that you deserve this or not. Do you deserve to get support if you do this? Or you only deserve this if you do that, right? But we also know that these kinds of notions not only affect the head of household, because usually these types of threats in policies are threatening the head of household, but those who are most affected are the vulnerable group, which are the children. So if the parents don't do this, then we take away the assistance. If they don't do this, then we don't give this. But the children are the ones that are affected. And do we value them as a human that deserves certain dignity to education, access to education, for example, access to proper nutrition, right? So it's important to think about the context and not to just narrow it down on whether the poor feels malu to get help. It's not hard to feel malu if you're constantly questioned. So there was one time that I felt it was a very important experience for me, because in one of the sessions that we went to interview a household in the PPR was that as soon as I arrived, the owner of the house told me that, "Doctor, the extra in my house and my children paid for me." So I didn't say anything. We just came to talk to them, but they felt that they constantly had to justify why they had anything. I didn't buy this, somebody else gave this to me. Immediately they felt they need to justify it because they felt that I would judge them. So that shame came from somewhere. It came from a particular social context that provided that. In the Islamic context, actually, there is a difference between the fakir and the miskin, right? One of the group is one that does not want to show that they are poor. Just like in the story of the child, or the narrative that I give of a child, is that they don't want their friends to know that they are poor. Just like when we talk about the food program at school, many children don't want to participate in the free food program because it identifies them as you're a poor kid. So I don't want to take this. So I'd rather not eat than for my friends to know I'm poor. So it's important to recognize that these feelings or these notions are contextual. It is not just happening because they are poor. It is happening because the system indicated something and it carried a certain symbol. And this symbol came from our understanding of our humanity, whether we believe that they are human and receive or deserves a certain type of dignity and respect. So I think that's really important for us to check and for us to evaluate in terms of our systems, whether we only give because you have done this. There is so many things that you have to do before you deserve something, while in other cases we never question, right? And I think the other thing that we haven't discussed today, and I'm scared we won't have time to discuss, is the idea of meritocracy. And I want to relate this to Dr. Khalid's discussion just now. It is easier to collect merits if you have material wealth and if you have social capital. And this merit accumulates and it turns into you deserving to be somewhere, right? How many of us, because of our social capital and our material capital that our parents have, give us good education, give us extra tuition that we need, give us someone to go home to ask about our homework, give us a space at home to sit down and do our homework, that gave us the ability to read before we start school at 7, right? That meant we were put in a certain class with other friends who are also doing well, with teachers who think we are smart, and then we move on to the next level. Just like if we are girls, we are likely to be able or more receptive to doing writing work that makes us be perceived as though we're smarter, that we are more cooperative, right? And then it goes on to the 2nd year, 3rd year, 4th year, and then at primary 6, you get a chance to go to a special school if you meet certain criteria, that you can go to now a certain exam, right, for that school, where there is extra emphasis, extra privilege for you to do better. Just like when you finish school to go to university, how many of the children in the PPR have an adult to help them fill in the UPU form, whether they know how to do the UPU form, right? In one of the PPR that we work with, the school that is nearest to their house is a school that the children say, I go to a bad school. My school is a bad school. The teachers at my school are afraid of us. So when one of the boys left the school to go to a better school, he said, I'm surprised that everything at my new school is in order, that we line up properly, that we dress properly. And the ability to dress properly means a lot. And when we work, we recognize that. The ability to sit down, the ability to have a conversation with someone, it matters. It becomes part of who we are. And it carries a certain value that translates into other things, right? Similarly, not feeling like you are out of place immediately. It's easy for many of us, or most of us, who come here and feel like this is not out of place. But if we decide, for example, oh, let's bring some children from the PPR here, they will immediately feel out of place, like I don't belong here. So that sense of feeling out of place carries on. Similarly, children who come from well-educated parents, going to university doesn't feel out of place. Asking your lecturer a question doesn't feel scary and intimidating. In fact, there's a study that middle-income children of professional parents are more brave or courageous to negotiate their timelines of their assignments, which means their marks are not affected, as opposed to children of lower income, because they're too scared. So they'll miss out marks, while the middle-income children, they can negotiate their way, because they know that I can actually negotiate. So those types of skills actually matter in terms of how they feel, whether they deserve to be in a place or not. So those are notions that we really need to think about. And they are very hidden things that maybe we have not measured yet. And I like to highlight that the numbers matter, but what are we measuring? So if there are economic students here, maybe think about what you're measuring, and whether there are some things that have not been measured that you can, because there will be PhD students, I assume, right? You can change that. Your work can be novel because you can measure now hidden things that have not been measured but are important. And so the cross-disciplinary work means you read outside of your field. Don't just read within your field, read outside. Those can be resources for you, references for you to add in thinking about what is it that we're measuring, how do we measure them, and then this data, that is numbers, is what policymakers want to change the policies. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sharifah Fatimah. Okay, we'll move to the final round, which is the third round. And so my third question for Prof. Fatimah is, can the cooperative-based model that Pak Ungku proposed be adapted to today's climate and sustainability agenda?
I know lunch is already served, yeah? I'm from a poor family. If lunch is served, that means we have to go for lunch. Okay, quickly, I still want to touch the idea of education. I believe Professor Heiser and USC can take it strongly in terms of the issue of education as one of your flagship, because in one of, can I have my next slide again? Even if you measure it in terms of multidimensional index, the level of deprivation for education is high, you know. That is going to be quite a big challenge in terms of how to address it. Look at the, again. Yeah, okay. This is what we did even if you compare education across region in terms of rural, indigenous, and urban. And the question that really become a big challenge, the blue bar, that's the deprivation in terms of education if you measure it in terms of multidimensional index. Right? Now you're not talking about complicated data, you're not talking about a fancy modeling here, just straightforward. Do you have the basic education or not? As simple as that. So that's a bit disturbing in terms of, even if you compare it across urban, coastal, and the rural community, the question of education remains significantly high in terms of deprivation. Now the question that comes into my mind, are you telling me that even in the urban setting, the education is still something that we have to face in terms of deprivation? I thought that the rural school have all the infrastructure, all the access, as compared to, you are talking about rural Sarawak and rural Sabah. So that's a big issue, and I do believe USC can tackle this, and one of the flagship and package in such a way that the policymakers will be able to listen. Now, to address your problem, at one point of time, on the idea of cooperative, I would like to look at the idea of cooperative in terms of the blue economy that the government have announced in the 13 Malaysia plan. I must thank the Academy Science Malaysia for proposing the framework in which the blue framework, the blue economy framework will become one of the platform of how the economy will be developed. Now, that's good as a form of policy guide. Now, let me share you a short experience, the struggle to sort of help the local community to form a cooperative. That was my work in 2016. Now, the whole idea about marine park area in Malaysia in which conservation is one of the mantra in which you conserve for future needs. That's good, but in the process of conservation, the community lose livelihood and also the income. So the whole idea is to help them form the cooperative entity, in which I believe it can work, right? But it's the biggest challenge is how do you use cooperative to challenge the market? That's the single most important challenge. You're talking about organizing a cooperative on retail good, on consumer good. The bigger market out there can sell it at a cheaper price. Then cooperatives are not going to win in that sense. But we try a different sector, that is the tourism sector. I believe it has a better chance to survive, because as much as the tourism sector is equally discriminative. If you are an owner of a 5-star hotel, you own the aeroplane, you own the landing ground, you own the boat, you own almost everything. Then you are talking about a market which is highly monopolized, highly concentrated in terms of the market power. Then if you want to have a cooperative against this setup in the tourism sector, it's going to be tough. But what we did then is to form a cooperative among the young in which we target a very specialized area in tourism sector. That is the diving, underwater photography that can really create the value added among the community, right? That is what we did for Tioman. But I'd like to share before I end, this is what I consider as Dr. Shafiq, I wish he is still here, on meta-economics. What we found out in Sabah and Sarawak while we are doing our work there, the model of conservation in relation to cooperative is quite different, in which the local community, especially in Sarawak, especially the longhouse and the tuai rumah, the head of the longhouse, have a total control of whatever flow of tourists coming into the selected area, in which that same tourist spot it's been managed by the local community. I don't think they have a cooperative structure as such, but it is just a community-based tourism in which they have a good control about how many can visit, the price, the rate they were going to charge, and they even use the condition of culture to moderate the inflow of tourists coming into the region. This is a smart way because it sort of addressed the carrying capacity of that area. Otherwise, you were talking about Tioman, Redang, with the flow of tourists coming in through cooperative or no cooperative, you're talking about the environmental degradation due to the tourism sector is going to be huge. So what they did in Sabah, they incorporate the local culture. In Sabah it's called Tagal, where you conserve the river, right? In Sarawak it's called Palau Sagai, something like that, Amon de Iban, in which the concept is to conserve the river, but the local community manage the tourism coming into the spot based on timing and based on the local culture, and along the way it become a model that is very practical in terms of the income coming into the community, right? And the other point about that is the question of the community can expand that activity beyond the tourism, food production, subsistence food production and whatnot. I think I've seen a better model in Sabah and Sarawak in which culture and belief is one of the platform in which they structured the community-based business that they can run, and I hope one day that will evolve itself to be a cooperative and it become a platform for the local community to sort of gain business out of that. So just to conclude, I've seen quite a good example in the tourism sector, in the conservation sector, in the environmental conservation in Sabah and Sarawak, which is a better model to look at, and there must be a factor why it's sort of performed well as compared to the rest. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Fatima. Okay, we'll move to the second panelist. My final question for Mr. Azlan. This is about Wakaf. We have what reforms or innovations are needed to make Islamic social finance tools more responsive to hidden and intergenerational poverty?
Alright, thank you very much. I will keep it very short. Taking the spirit from Dr. Fatima, when food is served, even if you call to prayer, you better to go and eat first. What more answering this question? So I think I would like to put what I have shared and discussed, because I really honestly feel undeserved sitting here. I am experiencing poverty right now. I feel very undeserved. So I just want to put one word to capture what I think need to be at the forefront of whoever works in whatever field that relates to poverty, which is to really uphold the dignity of human being. So, for example, just now Dr. Fatima mentioned about the Astro, right? So, and that reminds me when I was reading Poor Economics by Abhijit Banerjee and Duflo. They did this research for 15 years trying to understand the radical way of eradicating poverty. They found that farmers in certain areas, when they get money at lump, because they have to work for a year and then will get they not even spend on food or education, they buy satellite TVs. So he was asking this question, why? Without judging, because they value dignity and social standing more than survival, barely surviving. So that is something very important, because we tend to have an image, if someone is really in need, they must be living like in a prison kind of setting. Even I still remember a very vivid image. I was in Terengganu. We were at the seashore. There was a very old lady living in a hut and cleaning and chevaliers like cambiles. But she was wearing a very thick gold ring. So I was observing the gold ring. I think she noticed it and she said, "Oh, this is the memory of my past husband." So I was like, "Oh, okay, I'm sorry if I made you feel uncomfortable and have to explain it to me." But that really left a mark that every time I go, I have to remind myself, you don't know what is actually there. So some of them, our experience for the past 6 years, because we track the expenditure, we do ask questions when we see their expenditure. They will send us the accounts, what they bought, what kind of food they ate, what kind of emotion journals they submit to us. So one of the things is when we ask, if there is a situation, you have an amount of money, the option is between buying food or paying rent, which one will you prioritize? Almost all of them say, we will pay the rent. Food will not be an issue. We can bear this, but we are not going to lose a shelter to live or a place to stay. Even our friend from our foundation, they just came back from Kuantan, a family, a story of deprivation where a father lived for almost 8 years in Penang, his wife and children in Kuantan, and they only can meet in a very rare occasions because they are so much into the story because they are not accepted by the family. There are many dimensions that make their family struggle so much. So, and then eventually, after all these years, for the very first time, they are now in a home that is being rented, staying together. And the children is so happy, the wife, I can show you the videos of them crying and whatnot. For me, like, it's just a home. That's just something that never occurs to us that we have. And final note on the dignity. When I was in Istanbul, I really recommend all of you to spend, not on food, but go travel and go to Istanbul. There is a Topkapi Palace, which restores the history of Islamic Caliph from the Ottoman times. You have to spend at least 4 to 5 hours to complete the whole museum. But what I remember is there's one, this is like a tabung, it's like a place where you put money, but it's hidden. So the description written there, this was a public donation tabung where you must put your hand into it to put the money, and you also, if you want that money, you go in, put your hand into it and take the money. So the wisdom behind it is nobody knows who is giving the money and who is taking the money. They are completely protected from being seen as someone is taking aids and whatnot. So I think that kind of subtleness is something that we need to develop. We have food banks, we have in our masjid and surah also we have all this stuff, but of course they are locked and you have to ask for permissions and whatnot, but asking is very difficult. Asking and to put yourself down and put your dignity off and I need help, it's very difficult. Hence, if we study carefully, especially the Quranic text, we are not recommended to wait until someone come and ask. We are to go and find them. Even Quran says you can see the sign of deprivation and you have to have that sixth sense to notice that this person is in need. And of course, furthermore, you should not put them on the spot and announce it and make them as a, though we have a very vulgar word now, porn, poverty porn and whatnot. So that is something that we need to look into deeper, because that what entails whatever that Prof. Ungku said, that the faith elements, the spirituality, the kindness, the rahmah that we create. I really believe there is hope, and that not begins with only policy changes, but also us as a collective member of the society show more mercy and show more kindness, begin from our own family. Thank you very much. I see you and please don't ask questions to me, ask to them if there is an open air, and let's have a lunch. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Azlan. So our third panelist, this is the final question before we wrap up. In the spirit of Pak Ungku's cross-disciplinary vision, how can universities and communities collaborate to humanize development, transforming poverty research into empathetic social change?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. In spirit and support of my panelists who come before me, and I respect them very much, we will make this short. I just want to read out the Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan, because I think we're talking about education and the objective of education and what we strive, whether it is at the school level or at the university level. Pendidikan di Malaysia adalah satu usaha berterusan ke arah memperkembangkan lagi potensi individu secara menyeluruh dan bersepadu untuk mewujudkan insan yang seimbang dan harmonis dari segi intelek, rohani, emosi dan jasmani berdasarkan kepercayaan dan kepatuhan kepada Tuhan. Usaha ini adalah bagi melahirkan rakyat Malaysia yang berilmu pengetahuan, berketerampilan, berakhlak mulia, bertanggungjawab dan berkeupayaan mencapai kesejahteraan diri serta memberi sumbangan terhadap keharmonian dan kemakmuran keluarga, masyarakat dan negara. I think in the Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan there are clear guidelines of why we have education, and I think what is important is for us to revisit the purpose of education, be it at the school level or at the university level. Why do we do the research that we do? Right? What is the purpose of it? And it is also, it shows the hierarchy of things in terms of what do we prioritize, because in none of the measurement here talks about the employability of our graduates, for example, or the income level, or how rich our people will be, but it talks about the essential things that are important to our country. And it also talks about the hierarchy of where things will start, which is it starts with kesejahteraan diri first, and then it doesn't stop there, right? We don't do things just for ourselves. We don't just do research for our own benefit. We don't just do PhDs just to get a better job. There is something that we are supposed to serve. It is untuk memberi sumbangan terhadap keharmonian dan kemakmuran, starting with keluarga. And I think these are things that we don't emphasize anymore. Is the collaboration starts, number one, with our managing ourselves first, and then we have to start with our families. And I think the emphasis on families are reducing. So in thinking about being self-reliant, being collective, it must start with putting emphasis on families to take care of each other so that no child has to be taken to another home, right? And then to think about communities. Who are our near communities, right? From the Islamic perspective, we know we're responsible for 40 neighbors from the front, from the back, and from the side. So, meaning to say, we have to think about how we connect people together and how we can connect each other. In the urban context, I think many of us don't even know our neighbors. Can because we design our infrastructural space that our doors don't meet each other, so that when we open the door, we never have to see our neighbors if we don't want to see them. Right, so it creates this kind of environment in the same way that we can only go to the floor that we go because we constantly think that everybody is a threat. There's a safety, security threat of connecting people to each other. So it's connecting families, connecting communities, and then only we can go to the national level. So there is so much wisdom in the Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan already for us to think about what we do, whether it's in terms of collaboration with each other, or the purpose of our education and the purpose of doing the research that we do. So I hope that wraps things up quickly so we can all eat our lunch. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Dr. Sharifah Fatimah. So, and thank you very much for our esteemed panelists. Now we move to short Q&A session. Since we are short in time, so I'll open for just 3 questions. Ideally, 1 for each panelist, and you can ask 3 questions at once. Then we just give the panelists time for answering them. Thank you. Anyone wants to ask any question? Okay, so
since nobody want to ask question, I think to honor all our panelists, maybe this will be one question with you. You see, education is to give, to improve human quality, as most of us agree. But at the same time, nowadays, the human quality doesn't correlate very much with the monetary values. Those who have higher education, achievement education, will not be able to get good job and good income. Now we have, when we refer to labor market, a lot of incidents of people who couldn't get job and have to do informal job and mismatch. So, of course, these are even though these are monetary terms, but these are also contributions, and how we go about this, because as what just now Dr. Muhammad Ali also about, there will be no future. There will be no future. So that means if the trend like this continue, I also couldn't see the future clearly. And last time during my time, when we talk about the social mobility, so we want to give a good education to our children. But now we do not know what the future will be, especially your future jobs now. And there is some incident also that people, I think we read quite a lot also in the media, that people don't have much motivation to continue their education anymore. So maybe any one of you want to respond to this. Thank you. Thank you.
A quick one. My take on that is, one, we must give them a chance, right? At whatever cost, at whatever it takes. Because education remain fundamental in the human side of it. So what I think what we have been talking about here, the chance was never given. The policy failed, right? So that's when we talk about the extreme poor out there, the first child drop, second child drop, third child drop, that is the extreme form that we wanted to avoid. That must be avoided at all costs. And I think you and I understand how the economic system works. I mean, let the future be determined by how the economic structure will be transformed. You know, I mean, it is a cycle that we have to accommodate in terms of changes, in terms of the innovation, in terms of the technological leapfrog that we are having. So those are just structural mismatching that if you believe in market, it will solve by itself. But of course, I don't actually believe in the total 100% how the market works, but the policy has to come in to address some of that. So if we have the best of the both worlds, the market work, the policy is on sharp, on point, then we are not as grim and as difficult as we wanted to feel, you know. So I'm taking that way out in terms of education and for human welfare. Thank you.
If I just can add, Prof, one thing. I think for me the idea is the separation of education resulting in market. I think that's where I come from. That education is a right to be given regardless of what the outcome is in terms of the market value. That even if, just like we see in what we call more progressive or developed countries, there are people with PhDs who work as just as a cleaner even, for example. But the value of education didn't deplete itself, or it is not valueless because it didn't equate to income. So that's my take, is that the value of education shouldn't be valued only based on the income that it generates, because education is supposed to build the people. the income is the market's issue. The market needs to resolve that. But not to say that you don't need education because education is not going to give you a good income. Everybody deserves education because that builds our people. So the repurposing of education is to repurpose what is education for? Is it to give people jobs, or is it to build a nation of people with certain values, certain behaviors, certain kind of conduct? So that's where I'm coming from. It's not to say that we don't give people education. We have to give everybody education, but we shouldn't equate the value of education to the product or the outcome of the income level. But the value itself in nation building, because when we talked about the conversation today was going beyond the economic value, but recognizing that poverty can exist in other aspects also, that there are other things that we should value as people beyond the income of our people only, and the income should be a measurement, but it should not be our goal. Thank you.
I don't have an answer, but I can share some observation to my generation and below that I'm dealing with. There is an increasing deficit of trust towards the system, but there is also an increase of creativity and finding ways, breaking away from the conventional way of measuring success, measuring education level. For example, the poor economics just now I mentioned, you can actually attend the whole course for free. It's available on YouTube, for example. You are attending class at MIT, taught by one of the top professors. It's just your decision. So I think with proper mentorship, with proper awareness, the younger generation will find their ways to fix the value of the economy. I mean, like before, certain kind of career being paid certain amount of pay. Now, for example, the blockchain, the bitcoins, this kind of stuff. Actually, there is a value behind it in terms of transparency, trust. So they are developing a new form of economy that's growing. And even if you go and talk to children of these days in school, they are talking languages even we don't understand anymore. They are on something else there. So I believe humanity will always find ways, and we just need to ensure that their potential is fully reached by giving them what they need in terms of care, dignity, and opportunity, and not deprived from the excess. I think, inshallah, there is a hope, and it will be better. Whatever future lies will be better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, one more question.
Thank you. I want to touch on the role of religion. Okay. In Islam, although we have the various poor categories, asnafs, but Islam also encourages us to be a zakat payer, that is to be rich, that is, get out from poverty. So, but this is not emphasized on, especially in our policies. We talk about bottom 40% and all that. But then in Islam, we should recognize poverty or socioeconomic problem as a bigger dimension and a task of the ummah. So how do you place Islamic ethics or Islamic teachings into policies that doesn't really pay too much attention on statistics, but also on the bigger role of religion, and so that the eradication of poverty can be accepted as one that is the function and the responsibility of the ummah.
I guess the question is for me at first. This is like a Viva session, okay? I was brought up from Tadika Islam, Rendah Islam, Menengah Islam, Degree Syariah. a master Sharia, so I think I can say some word. I think the way we teach religion here is very legalistic and lack of value and empathy. So I think we go back to the seerah of the Prophet, the life of the Prophet Muhammad. If we study it, it shapes us in a different way of understanding how actually Prophet started his mission and how he was so involved in the society. And the first 13 years in Mecca was again and again about the orphan, about the poor, about the baby girls being buried alive, about the economic injustices, about the usury. He was speaking about social justice from day one, but that is not very much in our discourse of Islamic studies and in different fields. So even the Quran really criticized previous generation because they become so legalistic and avoided all these fundamentals of understanding. So I think there are certain adjustments needed to be done, and I can tell you with confidence because I'm regularly teaching in mosque and then also in gatherings in public. I think there is a fatigue among public when whatever being presented as an Islamic studies is very legalistic, and that's the load. And they are struggling in facing modern challenges, modernity, where it talks about moral values, principles, and I think with time, the newer generation that being exposed earlier on understanding Islam from the value angle and moral aspects more before getting into legalistic debates will shape the future policies, I guess, inshallah. And even I would state clearly, I worked in an Islamic finance industry. The discussion is very legalistic. I had attended probably hundreds of forums and discussion. What we discussed this morning, this afternoon, is very rare in an Islamic finance industry in terms of understanding the aspects of economy, Islamic economy. Is very like is like, I understand because it's a business area, but this kind of awareness will need to get into that. I think the Prime Minister also emphasizing on this aspect whenever he speaks about Islamic finance. I noticed that very clearly. So I think he is trying to bring back the conversation and the discourse on the values. That's my 1 cent. I think they should answer it.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. So that's the end of our session. I'll give back to the moderator and to the MC. Okay, this is our last question.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to ask the last question. This is for Ungku Aziz. In relation to what you said about the decline in the institution of men, I wanted to ask about how do we make sense of the fact that our society is patriarchal, but it's also the same social structure and system that are adversely affecting men, leading to the decline of the institution of men, as you have mentioned. So that's my question.
I think I'm being tortured now. First of all, I would argue on the statement that our society is patriarchal at first. From the historical context, even nowadays, even I have traveled to many parts of the world, I can confidently say that we are not patriarchal as much as being portrayed. Our historical context, even Malay tradition from Minang, and then in all the markets that we have, there is a good video series done by Professor Khairuddin Al-Junaid explaining about the woman emancipation in the Malaysian or Malay historical context. We don't have that typical patriarchal setup. I would argue that first. Number two, this would get me into a trouble, but we need to look into the wave of feminism that has shaped certain way of policy making and dealings with regard to gender related subjects. It's a quite sensitive stuff. I want to have my lunch. I don't want to go back hungry and beaten. So I think we need a separate forum to go deeper, but I really recommend you to read some books titled like The Fall of Men and Boys, Richard V. Reeves. You can search up in Google's and YouTube, you will find a lot of good videos, conversation that is backed by facts and evidence, not like just not little and whatnot. And they go into the data of school achievements, job markets, and pay and whatnot. So there are so much nuance in that. So I think it requires a lot of time. So and I'm hungry. I'm not going to answer that. Thank you very much.
Can I just add to that? I think it's important. It's important to clarify a few things because I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what patriarchy is, and often it is defined as men against women, but it's actually a certain kind of masculinity, which is not men as a gender or as a sex group, but it is a certain type of masculinity that is dominant. Meaning to say a certain type of definition of what is masculine. This is a long to what is masculine and what is feminine is contextual, and it changes a lot, right? According to the context of the situation. So when we talk about patriarchy, we're not necessarily talking about men dominating women in the total absolute context. I think that's important to know. And yes, we as a Malaysian, our Malay history, we have not been very patriarchal because our women have always had strong social and political role. And there are also studies to add to how colonization and modernization brought about patriarchy. Just like how, if we look at our past, women and men worked together in the fields, right? And it wasn't that women stayed at home only, that women supported men in many ways. And politically, women had always held certain positions. And in some of our royal families also, women were the sultanates or were female. So yes, we had now taken up a certain patriarchal notion that now affects our men and our women. So patriarchy doesn't just negatively impact women, it also negatively impacts men in some ways who do not fit into the masculine definition of patriarchy. So just to clarify so that there is no misunderstanding. And I agree with Ustaz Azlan also that feminism must be understood as a social movement, that it carries certain tones to it, and it's diverse in its conversation. And so what is important is that our society are critical about what those notions are and what those values are, whether it aligns with what we want and not. And I think that's what we want to address as well. So I think maybe so we can go through this Viva session together, support each other, and now we can have lunch, inshallah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll give back the session to the MC.